Today's presentation is using in-text citations in a variety of ways. I'm going to use an example source from a book that is a book written by an anthropologist, a very well-known anthropologist named Ashley Montagu, who died in 1999. He wrote tons of books, and one of them is The American Way of Life. And there's on page 248, I'm going to read an excerpt from it, and this is the original source that we'll use from which I'll show you some variations of how to cite it in different ways. One reason that I want you to understand better how to use in-text citations, and the reason that I'm telling you at this point in the game, is that I think that there's not enough variation in most people's papers, and I don't think people are thinking about all the different ways that you can incorporate your sources. And so I think it's really critical at this stage, at least at this stage, to focus on how you can use in-text citations successfully. To be human is to weep. The human species is the only one in the whole world of animate nature that sheds tears. The trained inability of any human being to weep is a lessening of his capacity to be human, a defect that usually goes deeper than the mere inability to cry. And this, among other things, is what American parents, with the best intentions in the world, have achieved for the American male. It is very sad. If we feel like it, let us all have a good cry and clear our minds of those cobwebs of confusion which for so long prevented us from understanding the ineluctable necessity of crying. Okay. Now, when you use APA style, and many of you are using APA style, you need to, when you include when you include a quotation and the source has pages, unlike say in a website, you need to indicate the page number at the end of the quoted material, and you'll use a P to indicate that. Whether or not it has multiple pages, it doesn't matter. Use a signal phrase, and by a signal phrase, I will mean the name or a reference to a person or a reference to an article or something like that. And the attribution, and the signal phrase includes attribution phrase words. Attribution words are words that indicate somebody said something, like argued or contended or something like that. And you've been given a list, like on a whole handout and everything in the past. Now, for APA style, you want to use the P period and before the page number or numbers, and put the beginning to the ending, or if it's just one page, just put that single page. Put the period after the parenthetical reference unless it is a block quote, which means a long quote, and in APA regulations, that means if it's 40 words or more, then you use a block quote, which means you indent from the left margin 10 spaces in other words, 2 tabs, 1 inch, and not anything on the right. And you continue the double spacing exactly as it is. You don't put an extra space between the regular paper and what you say in that, and then the block quote. You just continue it, but the indentation takes the place of quotation marks, so you don't put it in quotation marks. So you also put the year in parentheses as close as possible to the name, the attribution or signal phrase. There's no need to put the page number after the paraphrased material, though, if it spans more than one page or is just a summary. So those are the guidelines for that. Now, here's one example of how you could paraphrase this. Montagu, 1967, claims that American men have a diminished capacity to be human because they have not been trained by their culture not to cry. Now, This is not using the same sentence structures. It's not using most of the same words. It doesn't use the word ineluctable, which sort of means inevitable. And yeah, obviously you have to say cry or weep or something like that. So obviously the main point does not get changed. But, it's not like you're going to put quotation marks around the word cry. So that's one way. That's leading in. I often refer to that as a lead-in phrase. Another version. In his book, The American Way of Life, Ashley Montagu writes, quote, "The trained inability of any human being to weep is a lessening of his capacity to be human, a defect which usually goes deeper than the mere inability to cry." Quotation marks, space, open parentheses, P period, space, 248, close parentheses, period. Notice that the period does not go after cry and before the quotation marks. It doesn't go within. You always put it outside with on one exception. And in this case, it's not just introducing the source with the person's name, but it says something about the source, that it's a book, and that's what the name of it. And so, he doesn't necessarily say he writes this in the book. Okay. Number 3 is an example. According to Montagu, 1967, comma, to be human is to weep. Now you can use that capital T because that is a single sentence, and that's one way to show that. And you introduce it with the comma. Now, if this was the first reference, you would actually put Ashley Montagu, not just Montagu, but since we've been mentioning it already, I wanted to point that out. Then you got the P period and stuff. Number 4,